In 1941, when war swept across the plains of Ukraine, the simple backyard garden became the ultimate battlefield for survival. With supply lines cut, soldiers confiscating stores, and the cold creeping in, villagers couldn't afford a single failure or a single wasted calorie. Their resilience hinged not on modern science, but on 15 forgotten genius tricks passed down through generations. Methods that hid their food underground, created fertilizer from ash, and turned weeds into medicine. Today we're unearthing these lost secrets, including the mysterious potato pit, the medicinal burning bush, and the powerful Comfrey hack that could help anyone become self-sufficient in the face of uncertainty. The potato pit. Winter's secret cache. In the winter of 1941, the most valuable crop wasn't in the barn. It was buried 2 feet beneath the frozen Ukrainian ground, hidden from both the cold and the unwelcome visitor. When survival meant protecting every calorie from the harsh climate and the enemy, villagers relied on the kartopliana yama, or the potato pit. It was a simple but brilliant piece of engineering, designed not just for storage, but for concealment. Families would dig a deep, cone-shaped hole, usually 2 to 3 feet down into the earth, well below the frost line. They carefully lined the interior walls with thick layers of dry rye straw and dried grass, creating a thermal barrier. Potatoes, carrots, and beets, the calorie backbone of the winter diet, were carefully placed inside. A wooden ventilation shaft, often just a hollow reed or pipe, was placed in the center, allowing the produce to breathe. Finally, the whole thing was covered with soil, creating a low, unassuming mound of earth that blended seamlessly into the frozen landscape. This earthen insulation kept the pit at a consistent, cool temperature, preventing freezing while slowing down spoilage. It was an energy-free method that preserved the vital stores for 6 months or more. While a root cellar was ideal, the pit was easily concealed in a forest edge or field, a silent promise of food tucked away for spring. Today we rely on bright freezers and climate control, but that silent mound of dirt proves that sometimes the simplest technology is the most profound. The pit solved the storage problem, but the soil was starved. How did they replenish the earth without a single bag of store-bought nutrients and use the ashes of last night's fire to protect the crops of next summer? Ash, not chemicals, the original fertilizer. When wartime meant no access to store-bought fertilizer, villagers didn't panic. They simply looked to the one thing they had in abundance, the rich gray powder left behind in the hearth. This fireplace secret was more than just waste. It was the ultimate zero-cost, high-power nutrient source. After cooking or heating with wood, families would carefully collect the fine wood ash. The older generation knew this. Ash, particularly from hardwoods, was loaded with potash, or potassium, which is critical for helping plants develop strong roots, fight disease, and produce robust fruits. Unlike modern manufactured fertilizers that often focused on nitrogen, ash provided the resilience the garden needed to withstand tough times. Villagers would scatter the ash lightly over their carrot and potato rows, raking it gently into the soil. It was used in 2 ways. First, as a slow-release nutrient boost, and second, as a clever pest deterrent. A light dusting of ash around vulnerable plants like cabbage acted as a physical barrier against slugs and certain insects. You didn't need to barter or spend precious currency for it. Every home that cooked a meal was generating the fuel for next year's crop. Today we pour chemicals onto our lawns without a second thought. But the village garden taught a different kind of economy. It proved that sometimes the richest fertilizer is simply the resourceful application of what you already have. But pests and poor soil weren't the only threats. How did they use a national symbol to physically build a fortress against wind and maximize their precious garden space? The sunflower shield, guarding the corn. A Ukrainian garden wasn't just a place to grow food, it was a fortress. And the tallest, most golden-headed sentinels standing guard were the massive sunflower stalks. These tallest soldiers were strategically planted not just for their valuable seeds, but as living bodyguards for the more delicate crops. Villagers would plant towering sunflowers, a national symbol, along the northern edges of their cornfields, or interspersed within rows of beans and squash. Their sturdy, thick stalks provided an exceptional windbreak, shielding the more fragile corn from damaging gusts that could snap their stems and reduce yields. But their genius went further. The robust sunflower stems also served as natural trellises for climbing beans, allowing them to ascend towards the sun, much like the traditional Three Sisters planting method. This maximized the vertical space of a small plot, making every square foot count. After the summer, the sunflowers delivered their primary bounty: oil-rich seeds, a crucial source of fats and calories for both humans and livestock during lean times. Nothing was wasted. Even the spent stalks could be dried and used for kindling. This multifunctional approach turned a single plant into a protector and provider, proving that the best defense in the garden sometimes comes from unexpected allies. The sunflowers provided shade and seed, but spring was the most desperate time. When supplies ran low and the first frost was barely gone, how did they get a vital green harvest, weeks before the main crops even rooted? Thinning for survival. The beet greens trick. In a lean season, hunger forces a gardener to look at plants differently. The beet wasn't just a root, it was two separate vital harvests, months apart, providing the earliest source of vitamins when they were needed most. This was the first harvest of the year, achieved through a simple act of necessity: thinning. When beets, turnips, or mustard greens were planted, the goal was to produce strong, sizable roots for long-term storage. To achieve this, the closely clustered seedlings had to be separated, a process modern gardeners sometimes treat as a necessary evil. But in the 1940s village, those thinnings were never discarded. The tiny, tender leaves and stems were carefully plucked and collected. These delicate young plants, known as beet greens or tops, became the first fresh source of greens and vitamins of the early spring, weeks before a mature head of cabbage or lettuce was ready. They were crucial for warding off illnesses and boosting strength after a long, restricted winter diet. This practice exemplifies the principle of zero waste and maximum yield. Every single seed was valued, and every part of the plant was destined to feed the family. It was a quiet testament to a survival mindset that demanded efficiency from the moment a seed sprouted. If the villagers knew how to harvest the first signs of life, how did they ensure those young crops survived the inevitable summer drought using nothing more than porous clay? Water from below. The clay pot, olla. In the hot, dry summers of the steppes, watering cans were a luxury, and wasted water was a crime. The old method was quiet, slow, and brilliant. Water stored in porous earthenware, offering a deep, precise drink to struggling roots. This slow drink was the ancient Ukrainian solution to efficient irrigation. The technique centered on the use of an olla, an unglazed clay pot with a narrow neck, often made by local potters. These pots were buried in the garden soil right next to the plants, with only the rim exposed above ground. The villagers would fill the buried olla with water, then cover the rim to prevent evaporation and keep out insects. Because the clay was unglazed, the water slowly seeped through the porous walls directly into the surrounding soil. This meant two critical things. First, nearly 100% of the water went straight to the root zone, unlike surface watering, where much is lost to the air. And second, it encouraged the plants to grow deep, resilient roots as they reached for the consistent moisture source. Unlike surface watering, which makes plants lazy, the slow seeping forced the roots deep into the stable, cool subsoil, protecting the entire crop against the hottest, driest winds. This system saved immense labor and was absolutely essential in times when water and available hands were scarce. It was pure, energy-free genius, conserving a precious resource using nothing more than mud and ancient knowledge. But what was the easiest, most dependable crop they grew? The resilient grain that could produce food in just 10 weeks when the soil itself was failing. The hardest grain, buckwheat resilience. They didn't rely on fussy wheat or delicate rice. The staple that sustained the village through the war years was tough, highly nutritious, and grew happily in the poorest soil, hrechka, or buckwheat. It was the resilient kasha's kernel, the grain that defied neglect. Buckwheat became indispensable because of its unique characteristics. First, it had an extremely short growing season, often maturing in just 8 to 10 weeks. This meant villagers could plant it later in the spring, or use it as a crucial second crop planted immediately after an earlier crop failed or was quickly harvested. Its hardiness was legendary. Unlike demanding wheat, buckwheat could thrive in sandy or marginal soils that lacked deep fertility, which was common in over-farmed wartime plots. Nutritionally, it provided superior protein and fiber, forming the basis of the hearty porridge, kasha, that kept families alive when meat was non-existent. Every village knew a plot of buckwheat was insurance against starvation, turning marginal land into life-saving sustenance. It was the definitive survival food, requiring minimal fuss for maximum caloric return. Buckwheat's quick turnaround offered a lifeline when every season was uncertain. But beyond the annual crops, how did they utilize the abundant wild greenery around their homes to fortify their health and create a free fertilizer? Comfrey's dual purpose, medicine and mulch. It was the village pharmacy and the garden's secret weapon, all rolled into one tough, leafy plant. The old women called it the herb that could knit bones. This was comfrey, the all-purpose plant that was absolutely indispensable when medical care was scarce. Comfrey was deliberately planted in forgotten corners of the garden for its remarkable dual purpose. Medicinally, its large fuzzy leaves and roots were crushed into poultices and applied externally to heal bruises, sprains, and minor cuts. The plant contains allantoin, a compound that encourages cell growth, which is why it earned its potent, healing nickname. But its service to the garden was just as vital. Comfrey is known as a dynamic accumulator, meaning its deep taproots pull up essential nutrients like potassium and nitrogen from deep within the subsoil. Rather than waiting for the leaves to decompose, villagers practiced chop and drop mulching, harvesting the huge leaves and simply letting them wilt on the soil surface to feed neighboring, shallower-rooted vegetables. Others would steep the leaves in water for a few weeks to create a pungent, fast-acting liquid feed for tomatoes and peppers. Its deep root system provided an endless, free source of nutrients, solving the problem of depleted topsoil that plagued most wartime gardens. In a single plant, they found both a powerful healer and a free, renewable fertilizer. If they were this resourceful with medicine, what hardy, thorny plant did they use to save their property lines and yield a high vitamin? Harvest, the current hedge defense, living barbed wire. Like the current hedge, the raspberry patch served a purpose beyond dessert. Its dense, thorny canes created a frustrating, nearly impenetrable barrier that marked property lines and protected precious livestock. This was the tangled border, fruit that literally fought back. In the 1940s, fences were a luxury and easily dismantled, but a wall of thick, established raspberry canes offered a cheap, living defense. These were often the older, wild-type varieties, known for their aggressive growth and abundant, sharp thorns. Villagers would strategically plant the canes along garden edges or around chicken coops, letting them grow into an almost impenetrable thicket. This created a strong defensive barrier against trespassers, large pests, and even stray dogs, while simultaneously yielding a dependable harvest. The fruit itself, small, sweet raspberries, was vital for making quick jams and preserves. Furthermore, the leaves were dried to brew a mild, traditional tea. The patch required very little effort. It spread and renewed itself, making it an efficient use of space and labor when families had little time to spare. The raspberry patch was a lesson in practicality, achieving security and sustenance from the same resourceful growth. But defense was only half the battle. How did they ensure that the genetic future of their entire garden survived the war, hiding tomorrow's crops in a tiny cloth pouch? Saving the best, heirloom seed banking. Every harvest, a quiet ritual took place. The finest, most perfect seeds were selected, dried, and placed into tiny cloth pouches, a single powerful act of faith in a chaotic world. This was the practice of heirloom seed banking, literally carrying the future in your pocket. In the 1940s, dependency on external markets or supplies was a fatal risk. Families were meticulously committed to saving non-hybrid seeds from their best-performing plants. The tomato, with the deepest red color, the bean with the highest yield, the squash that stored the longest. The seeds represented the accumulated knowledge of generations, perfectly adapted to that specific Ukrainian soil and climate. After meticulous drying on screens or old clothes, they were labeled, often using a piece of charcoal, and bundled into small linen or cotton bags. The crucial final step was concealment and protection. These precious bundles of genetic heritage were hidden in cool, dry places, tucked away in rafters, sealed in old glass jars, or even buried near the hearth. Saving seeds wasn't just gardening. It was a profound political and economic statement of independence and resilience. These hidden pouches were the village's true wealth, proof that even when everything else was lost, the ability to feed yourself the next spring could still be secured. Now, how did they ensure their valuable root crops, like carrots and parsley, stayed crisp and unspoiled all winter? Long without a root cellar or refrigeration? The carrot and sand method, long-term storage. A root cellar was great, but not everyone had one. For the deepest, longest storage of carrots and beets, the villagers used a simple, surprising medium to keep them crisp, plain, dry sand. This underground clock ensured their vital root vegetables kept time and survived the long, lean winter months. The technique, known as the carrot and sand method, was essential for preserving crops like carrots, parsley root, and rutabagas outside of a dedicated cellar. First, the vegetables had to be harvested carefully, ensuring they were completely dry and undamaged, and that the tops were trimmed but not cut into the root crown itself. Next, in large wooden boxes, barrels, or even carefully lined earthenware pots, the villagers created alternating layers of roots and clean, bone-dry sand. The sand served a crucial double purpose. It prevented the vegetables from touching each other, which stopped the spread of rot, and it maintained a stable, slightly humid environment. This slowed down the vegetables' respiration and prevented them from shriveling, keeping them firm and sweet. These containers were then placed in the coolest, darkest corner of a basement, shed, or even the corner of a pantry. This simple material science, using nothing more than grit and wood, preserved freshness without a single unit of electricity. It proved that if you couldn't store food, you could store the conditions that kept the food fresh. But what innovative trick did they use to feed their small plots when they couldn't afford a large traditional compost pile? Maximizing the plot, trench composting. In a small plot, you couldn't afford a large compost pile that took up valuable growing space. The answer was to bypass the traditional heap entirely, choosing instead to bury the household scraps and garden waste directly where they were needed most. This was the brilliant system of trench composting, or burying the past. The technique was essential for villagers who farmed small, intensively used plots. Instead of hauling kitchen scraps, potato peelings, vegetable trimmings, even fish bones, to a distant pile, they were deposited directly into a shallow trench or pit dug between existing planting rows. Over time, the soil microbes and earthworms would break down this buried material, essentially creating a slow-motion, underground fertilizer factory. This achieved two critical things simultaneously. It provided immediate, discrete waste disposal for the home, and it delivered continuous rich nutrients exactly to the root zone of the growing crops. Because the composting happened below the surface, moisture was retained and essential elements were not lost to the air. This method ensured maximum soil fertility and efficiency, keeping the ground rich and healthy without sacrificing a single square foot of precious planting space to a compost heap. It was a perfect expression of wartime gardening, turning decay into growth with minimal effort and maximum yield. But even with perfect soil, how did they preserve their largest and most vital vegetable, the humble cabbage, to yield life-saving vitamins through the brutal winter? The cabbage commitment, sustenance through winter. There was one vegetable every Ukrainian knew they needed to survive the dark months. It was hardy, it stored forever, and when prepared right, it was a source of vital nutrients. The humble cabbage, the true head of the table. Cabbage was the ultimate survival crop for its incredible versatility and sheer biomass. Families would dedicate significant garden space to two types: early, smaller heads for immediate consumption, and late, large, dense heads specifically for long-term preservation. The late harvest heads were often huge, sometimes weighing more than 10 pounds each. While some were hung in cool cellars, the vast majority were destined for fermentation. Cabbage was shredded, packed tightly into wooden barrels with salt, and left to slowly transform into sauerkraut. This wasn't merely a taste preference, it was a matter of survival. The fermentation process not only preserved the vegetable for months without refrigeration, but also increased its vitamin C and probiotic content. Sauerkraut was essential for warding off scurvy and maintaining gut health throughout the winter, when fresh produce was impossible to find. It was a reliable, cheap, and simple way to stockpile life-saving vitamins. The cabbage commitment was a cornerstone of village food security, proving that preparation was often the only difference between surviving the winter and failing to. But sometimes, when the crops failed, they had to look beyond the cultivated garden. What wild burning plant provided a quick, powerful nutrient boost when everything else was gone? Nettle tea. The quick nutrient boost. When the garden was still sleeping under spring frost, there was one wild plant that appeared early, packed with more vitamins than spinach, and yet few dared to touch it: the stinging nettle. This burning bush was the quintessential forage food, a defiant sign of life when cultivated crops were still just dreams. In the desperate months of early spring, when the stored root vegetables were shriveling and the ground was barely thawing, nettles provided a crucial nutritional bridge. Villagers, often the women and children, would venture out to gather the fresh young shoots before they flowered. The key was careful handling, usually with thick cloth or gloves, to avoid the painful sting caused by the tiny hollow hairs. Once brought inside, the nettle's magic was revealed. Boiling or steeping the plant for even a few minutes completely neutralized the sting. The resulting liquid and greens were used to make a highly nutritious, iron-rich tonic tea, or added to thin soups and stews. It was a potent, free source of vitamins and minerals, essential for warding off sickness and fatigue after a winter of lean eating. The plant's aggressive nature, which made it a pest to some, made it a valuable friend to those who knew its secret. The stinging nettle proved that sustenance was often hiding in plain sight, requiring only the knowledge and courage to reach out and claim it. But if they protected the soil and foraged the wild, what fast-growing plant did they use to create a living, thorny fence that fed them and protected their chickens? The living fence, raspberry cane barriers. Like the current hedge, the raspberry patch served a purpose beyond dessert. Its dense, thorny canes created a frustrating, nearly impenetrable barrier that marked property lines and protected precious livestock. This was cane and thorn, the dessert that formed a wall. In the 1940s, metal fencing was often scarce, confiscated, or needed for other purposes, so villagers relied on robust, living barriers. They intentionally allowed old-fashioned raspberry canes, known for their aggressive, thorny growth, to form thickets along their property edges and around sensitive areas like small chicken pens. The intertwined, tough canes created a natural, low-maintenance security system that was difficult for animals or unwelcome strangers to pass through undetected. This not only marked territory, but also ensured the safety of vital protein sources like poultry. Crucially, the patch provided a reliable, annual harvest. The raspberries were vital for making quick, nutritious preserves and jams, and the leaves could be dried for a comforting herbal tea. Because the patches spread so readily, they required almost no effort to maintain year after year, offering a dependable dual harvest with minimal labor, a perfect equation for wartime efficiency. It was a brilliant example of how necessity fostered innovation, transforming a simple fruit bush into a self-renewing, protective asset. But what was the final, critical step in preparing the village for the long, cold season, transforming summer herbs into winter's medicine chest? Sun-drying herbs, the attic apothecary. The final harvest of the year wasn't vegetables, but scents. Bunches of thyme, mint, dill, and chamomile were tied and hung high in the dry, dusty rafters of the attic, waiting to become winter's medicine. This was the quiet work of preserving the scent, transforming the summer garden into the attic apothecary. In the 1940s, basic medical supplies were scarce or non-existent, making the knowledge of medicinal herbs absolutely critical. Villagers knew that the intense heat and dryness of the upper rooms, attics, or unused spaces above the stove provided the perfect conditions for drying herbs. Stems were bundled together, tied with simple twine or thread, and hung upside down from rafters or nails. This slow, air-drying method preserved the plant's essential oils and medicinal potency far better than rapid heating. Chamomile was stored to calm anxious stomachs. Mint was used for tea to soothe coughs, and dill was critical for digestion and flavoring fermented foods. The smell that permeated the house was a comforting, earthy reassurance. The family's health kit was secured for the long, hard winter. It wasn't just medicine, it was psychological armor, a quiet, fragrant proof that they had outsmarted disease and scarcity with nothing but the sun and the summer's bounty. These dried herbs represented a completely decentralized health system, relying only on nature and careful preservation. The attic apothecary was the village's final act of defiance against the harsh season, proving that wisdom, even more than food, was the greatest resource they harvested. And that self-sufficiency, born of necessity during the war, is a lesson worth remembering today. If these forgotten tricks of resilience and survival fascinate you, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss another deep dive into the lost knowledge of history.